For the viewers who may not recognize you, could you let them know who you are, where you're from, and definitely what do you do?
Sure. So my name is Alex Krieger. I've been a professor at the Harvard University Graduate School of Design since a long time, since 1977. Uh, I've just become a professor emeritus. I've also been a practicing architect and planner, uh, running my own firm for many years called Chan Krieger and Associates. But over the last 12 years, I've been a principal at a sort of national firm called NBBJ, doing work all around the world, which with which my firm merged some time ago. I also write about largely about sort of urban planning issues and the kind of evolution of sort of modern urbanization patterns, somewhat around the world, but mostly in North America. That's about it, I think.
Wow. Okay. Okay. That sounds amazing. You've been doing this longer than a lot of people been alive, or even been working in one field. That's really inspiring. And what courses did you actually teach?
Well, I'm not fully retired. The advantage of
Okay.
a professor emeritus title is that I still have all the privileges of being a professor, but no obligations. Uh, and I'm currently teaching at some of the other design schools in Boston because after so long being on the Harvard faculty, I'm kind of eager to quote, test myself against non-Harvard students. So I've just completed a course at Northeastern University, which is another major school in the Boston area. Over the decades, of course, I've taught many courses and a number of subjects, but the course that I've taught for perhaps the longest time is called The Design of the American City. Also partially the title of a book that I've recently produced. And it talks about the kind of evolution of urbanization in the United States based upon a whole series of sort of aspirations about those who sort of come here over the past couple of centuries to kind of sort of improve upon the forms of settlement that where they came from, mostly originally kind of in Europe and subsequently since other places around the world. And it was a course that was offered at Harvard for many years. It was a very popular course. It had hundreds of students in it. And now I'm teaching a similar course at Northeastern. I've also taught it at Wentworth Institute of Technology, another school in the Boston area. But yes, I'm certainly retired from full-time teaching now, as well as from full-time practice as well. But I can tell you some of the projects that I've been involved with, both in the States and in other parts of the world. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, I would definitely like to hear more about that as well.
Well, I mean, I'm not going to start with kind of year one and go through to year 19 to 49, but a couple of interesting things. For instance, I've spent a lot of time in China, largely because that's where things are happening so quickly. And the Chinese are very interested in the kind of expertise that comes from United States professionals and planners and teachers. And so perhaps my most important project actually was the redesign of what is called the Shanghai Bund, which is a major public space along its river. The Bund actually the term itself refers to port. This was once the port for Shanghai. However, it has been kind of relocated to a much more modern facility. And so along a several mile stretch, a major public space was created with our help. And what's impressive for me is designing a space that on any weekend, upwards of a 250,000 people move up and down this promenade, both looking back at the old Shanghai as well as across the river to the so-called Pudong area, the new Shanghai, which is, at least according to Chinese government, expected to replace New York City as the sort of the capital of capitalism at sometime during the 21st century. We also designed a sort of a plan not yet realized in Botswana, for the University of Botswana. I have not traveled extensively throughout Africa, but Botswana was one of the places that we got an opportunity to help them plan. And at the moment, I'm actually sort of discussing how to donate my library to the University of Lagos. I have an extensive library, but Harvard has most of the same materials, so they're not so interested. But the University of Lagos and many other universities in the United States now don't accept such libraries, partially because it requires space and so much has been digitized and so forth. So what they actually request is that you donate some money along with the books. So we're now talking, but the University of Lagos, which has a pretty good school of architecture and planning, I was very interested in my books on architecture and planning. And we're just trying to figure out how to get some grants for what would be a fairly expensive shipping proposition to them. So please ask me other questions about how I can help inform your audience about some of the things that I do.
Wow. That's amazing. That's really interesting. I got a chance to visit Botswana. That's a beautiful country. I really enjoyed my stay there. I'm sure the University of Lagos they would be more than happy to have that extensive library that you have, and I appreciate you
I
even
met with
sharing
them.
that.
A couple of folks from there recently came through Cambridge, Massachusetts, and Harvard, and I had quite a nice discussion with them. And over the next couple of months, we're going to apply for grants. There surely are some that would then allow, accommodate the shipping costs for the library. And I'd be very proud for it to wind up at the University of Lagos.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Now I can ask you this. It's a general question for those who may not be in the know. What are the differences between, or maybe you can define architecture, urban design, and urban planning?
Yes, it is both possible and never quite exactly do so. Of course, architecture primarily deals with individual buildings. Say a library for a university or a housing project or sort of a community center. So largely dealing with individual projects. Planning, on the other hand, urban planning obviously is involved with more with sort of policy issues and larger scale issues, sort of regulating the growth of a city, trying to regulate the growth of a city in different contexts. So it's more again sort of a policy and program and sort of a layout of the use of land and land use regulations, and developing kind of other kinds of guidelines for how the city might grow or evolve or transform. And urban design lies somewhere in between those two things. Again, if architecture deals with individual buildings mostly, planning dealing with sort of land use at a larger scale and policies surrounding land use for cities. Urban design tends to operate between those two things. In say when a project comes along, maybe like a campus, say for the University of Botswana, that involves laying out more than one building, laying out a site for several buildings, or for a new district in a city, or for what is happening in many places around the world now is in sort of trying to find a way to reconnect with one's waterfront in cities. Obviously, a popular place to live, but also becoming a little bit more harder to figure out how to do, given climate change and worries about sea level rise and so forth. So again, architecture, building design, planning, really thinking about cities overall, and urban design, using both the disciplines of planning on the one hand and the disciplines of architecture on the other hand, laying out sort of areas in cities, districts in cities, neighborhoods, and so forth. So that's the best I can do.
Okay, okay. I appreciate you breaking that down. Now I wanted to ask you about this. President Barack Obama appointed you to serve on the U.S. Commission of Fine Arts. Could you talk about your role and what was that experience like?
Yes, I did this for a 2 4-year terms. The Fine Arts Commission is an important but in somewhat antiquated commission. It was created in 1910 as the U.S. Capitol, the city, right, was starting to grow enormously. Around the time, not to go into the history too much, but around at the end of the 19th century, America sort of emerged as a sort of important country, an important sort of industrial nation. It started to see itself as being able to compete with, the other kind of great countries around the world and so forth. 100 years after its revolution, where it became a country. So it was a moment when there was an awful lot of development happening. And it was also a moment when American government wanted to kind of add to the capital, to give it some, kind of a prominence, even grandeur, to represent it as an important, to have it to represent it to the rest of the world. In other words, capitals like Berlin or Paris or London, uh, sort of known around the world as somehow being representative of that culture and that nation. And the U.S. capital had not grown very much during the 19th century. There was no real need for a major capital, given that the states' rights were thought to be primary. But as the federal government gained importance and began to do more of the work of governance for the country overall, there's a desire to create a capital worthy of the nation, let's call it that. And so as buildings are being proposed and built, there's a need to kind of create a commission that would evaluate the correctness or the elegance or the appropriateness of new buildings, especially around the monumental core where our capital is located, our president's house is located, our sort of congressional facilities are located. So the Fine Arts Commission, yes, appointed by the president at the time, at a particular time, appoints 7 people, and they form a commission, and they meet regularly to receive presentations about proposed buildings for the government, as well as, in the capital area. And we kind of review those buildings or memorials or public spaces or parks, and then kind of suggest how they might become better designed or become more appropriate to their setting. And each project that is planned to be added to the nation's capital has to get the approval of the so-called Fine Arts Commission. So that's that particular role. It's a sort of an odd name these days because it deals really more with buildings and spaces than fine arts. But the name was created back in around 1910, and so it seemed to kind of be the broader theme, fine arts encompassing not just art, but also buildings and places and statues and memorials and so forth.
Wow. Okay. Okay. Now you had spoke about this a little bit earlier, but if you could go into a little more detail about it, the MBBJ, what exactly is that, and what was your role in that?
Well, NBBJ are the initials of 4 white dead guys. How's that? It's a firm that has existed in the since for about 80 years. It's one of the largest architecture and planning firms operating in the United States, but also with
Wow.
offices in London, in Hong Kong, in Shanghai, and so forth. So it has business around the world as an architecture firm. Uh, my own firm, which I ran for many years with a partner called Lawrence Chan. So Chan Krieger, we ran a smaller firm. We ran about a 30-person firm out of Cambridge, Massachusetts. And at some point, I'm trying not to kind of get into too much sort of an interesting detail, but in this country in particular right now, there's a sort of consolidation of larger firms acquiring smaller firms as a way to expand their market and so forth. So about
Wow.
14 years ago, a particular client hired both NBBJ and Chan Krieger to work on a major hospital building in Boston. And as we started to work together, NBBJ, which really originated in Seattle, so 3,000 miles away from Boston on the other coast, began to realize that there was an awful lot of sort of healthcare, very many distinguished hospitals and healthcare areas and biomedical research being done in Boston, many universities and campuses, and they felt that they could sort of start a firm in the Boston area, expand their operations on the East Coast, and so started to negotiate with us about, we call it merging, but actually we were bought, right? We were bought by NBBJ. And again, NBBJ is known worldwide. It has done all kinds of projects. Its specialty really is in healthcare projects. They've done healthcare and biomedical research buildings really all around the world. And as we joined them or became a part of NBBJ, we continue to do work for a number of the hospitals in the Boston area.
Wow. Okay. That sounds like some great work. Now I wanted to ask you also about you were the director of the NEA Mayor's Institute in City Design. If you could speak about that a little bit.
Sure. I was a director for a 5-year term. The National Endowment for the Arts, among many of its programs, also established an ability to teach mayors about design, right? So if you think about it, the mayor of a city is has a substantial amount of responsibilities, including in the built environment, right? Including in design matters and planning matters, but they're rarely trained in that area at all, right? They actually oftentimes are kind of unconfident about how to deal with those matters. And so they kind of, hire architects and planners, but sometimes they don't even know how to do that particularly well. So the Institute for the Mayor's Institute on Urban Design was created some time ago, many years ago, and I became its director for a period of time. What it does is it sort of invites a small number of mayors from around the country, large and small, to participate in a 3-day kind of conference, during which time they're sort of exposed to design thinking and urban design and planning thinking, right? Each of them come to this conference with a sort of a problem that is somehow, being dealt with or being proposed in their city. They present it, and then each mayor, and then the other mayors at the conference, there are usually 8 mayors, as well as 8 experts, you might say, such as myself, let us say, right? And so the couple of days are spent in helping the mayor kind of think through the problem that they brought with them. We don't try to solve it, but we, of course, discuss how they kind of think about it. And the value is both immediate in terms of that particular issue that the mayor brought with him or her, but more broadly, the purpose of this is to make mayors more conscious of design thinking, more conscious of urban planning thinking. And as they kind of go back to their cities, they gain a certain amount of additional confidence and respect for design thinking, hopefully then to kind of deal better with those issues throughout their term. So it's existed for about probably now 30 years, and individual universities could apply for 5-year terms to run it. And I served as a sort of an expert for many years, but at some point I, through Harvard, then applied to direct it for a 5-year term. And so we brought these small groups of mayors to Harvard and Cambridge and Boston for these sessions where they were sort of introduced and hopefully became better educated about architecture and planning issues. So that's the Mayor's Institute on Urban Design, and it continues now as well. I am not now as directly involved.
Okay, okay. Now, is that different from the Boston Civic Design Commission?
This, you've looked at my CV rather carefully. Uh, the Boston Civic Design Commission is sort of analogous to the Fine Arts Commission, DC. As the Fine Arts Commission evaluates design and planning projects for the Capitol, the Boston Civic Design Commission does so for the city of Boston. There, I served for probably 2 decades. The BCDC, as it's known, reviews projects mostly for the downtown areas of Boston, and again tries to somehow think about how, on the one hand, projects that are being proposed respect the traditions of Boston, respect the traditions of its architecture and districts and places and historic. Boston, as you may know, is one of the oldest cities in America. So on the one hand, it tries to kind of induce design thinking when projects are being proposed to deal with those traditions, at the same time also trying to sort of evoke more creative thinking about design, as representative of the fact that today Boston also happens to be one of the world's leaders in high technology companies, biomedical companies, and other sort of healthcare related research. So here's this kind of double this kind of conundrum. On the one hand, projects in Boston should represent its history, but at the same time, it also should be appropriate for and symbolize the kind of new economies that Boston is currently known for, both nationally and around the world.
Okay, okay. Yeah, that definitely makes a lot of sense. It's definitely a world-class history, and it's definitely, where a lot of that American heritage and history come from as well. So you don't want to forget about that. Now, I want to ask you about this. You're on the New England Holocaust Memorial Committee. If you could speak about that.
Well, again, you're asking about projects that have been a very important part of my life for a while. It so happens that I am. My parents were Holocaust survivors. They survived the Nazi efforts to kind of exterminate the Jews during World War II. After they met after the war, and without telling too long of a story, they wound up emigrating to the United States. So I'm an immigrant. I'm technically an immigrant because I came to America when I was 9 years old with my parents. I'm actually involved in the early stages of writing a memoir about that. So as you may be aware, there are, how do I say this? In the last decade or two, as the folks, there were either survivors of this catastrophe or, liberators, the kind of American and British and Russian soldiers who liberated the camps and, helped win the war, World War II and so forth for democracy. As the last of these survivors were passing, right? There were kind of moments when different cultures said, hey, we better build a memorial. We better think about how to memorialize this event, right? And so that was the case in Boston. So I became involved as a kind of a design advisor for the effort to build a memorial in Boston. So that was a 6-year effort involved in raising funds and helping in trying to get the city to help identify a site for it. If you Google the New England Holocaust Memorial, you will see what it looks like. It's a very interesting design, actually produced by an architect from San Francisco, of all places. One of my several roles during the 6-year process was to organize a design competition that selected the architect for the memorial. And so for 6 years, I was quite heavily involved in getting this thing built. I was a vice president of the so-called committee, right? But the committee doesn't exist right now. There's an organization that maintains the memorial. And I hope you do Google it, because it's quite a fascinating structure. Again, not designed by me, but so brought into the world partially as a consequence of my efforts to both raise funding, organize the design competition, be part of the selecting of the designer who then designed this memorial. It's in the shape of 6 glass towers, quite tall, fully glass towers. And on each tower, there are 6 towers, because 6 is an important number in Jewish culture, and among a variety of ways, but including the fact that there were 6 principal extermination camps created by the Germans. And it was during a 6-year period from 1939 to 1945 when this kind of this campaign to exterminate the Jews of the world was taking place. So there's 6 glass towers that sort of commemorate those 6 extermination camps. And each glass tower has 1 million numbers, random numbers, located on that tower. And that's because there were approximately 6 million Jews who perished during the Holocaust. So it's quite a striking memorial. It's not about it's not like many memorials that show an emaciated person or kind of an army soldier liberating a kind of an enslaved survivor. It's much more abstract, but it's rather kind of poetic in this regard. And it's located, one of the most important parts of it, at least for Boston, is it's located along what is called the Boston Freedom Trail. And the Boston Freedom Trail is a kind of a several-mile walk that many tourists from around the country and some internationals as well walk. And you walk past 16 places that were somehow instrumental during the American Revolution. Sometimes a church, sometimes where one of the kind of major revolutionary figures lived, and so forth. And so again, several million people walk this trail. And if I can say, one of my contributions to the memorial, in addition to what I've already said, right, is that there's a plaque along the beginning of this. You actually walk through these 6 glass towers. You can walk through them, right? And each is dedicated to one of these sort of extermination camps, like Auschwitz, right? And there's a plaque that says, "Those who walk the Freedom Trail consider the absence of freedom," right? And so, again, it's many people who are expecting to walk along these 16 memorials to the American Revolution kind of wonder what these 6 towers are about. And they sort of cross the street and realize that they are a memorial to the Holocaust.
Wow, that's great. That is really great, and I appreciate your contribution to, keep that memory and keep that history, preserved and exposing people to it.
Yeah. Believe it or not, in the last couple of decades, there are about 200 memorials to the Holocaust that have been realized. Probably a couple of dozen in major U.S. cities, but also throughout Europe and even in Germany, Soviet Union, Poland, and so forth. And this tends to happen with memorials. Sometimes memorials are built a little bit too quickly. Before you really can before history can sort of judge the importance of the event, if you will, right? But in many cases, usually around the time when those involved in a particular period start to kind of pass, that there this kind of an attempt to say, wait a minute, before you all go away, we need to kind of memorialize this. And so that led to a substantial number of memorials being designed and built, again, in the last 2 or so decades, in many parts of the world. Yeah. But we think one of the most remarkable ones is in Boston. So I do hope you Google it and see what it looks like, right?
Yeah, definitely. I'm gonna make it happen. I'm definitely interested in checking it out, and I know the viewers will as well. We 30 minutes in, so I wanted to ask you one last quick question, if it's okay. You mentioned you're working on the memoir. If you could speak about that, and are you working on any other projects? You got anything else going on or coming up that you wanted to, let the viewers know about?
Well, I'm always working on projects, but now in a kind of a semi-retirement phase of my life, right? Uh, so no, I'm working on memoir. This is not meant to make the New York Times book review. It's essentially for family and so forth. But I've led a fairly interesting life, and so I'd like sort of other people to kind of maybe kind of consider it, right? As the life of an immigrant in America, and while we think of America as a place that always welcomes immigrants, that's not always been the case. And in fact, we're going through a period right now where or the opposite is happening, where we sort of vilify immigrants and so forth. So that's why I'm interested in sort of discussing a kind of a happy story, if you will, about the life of an immigrant and enjoying all the benefits of American culture and society, and not being accused of being a rapist or a murderer or a drug dealer, as sometimes immigrants are being accused now. I'm also in an early stages involved in a book project because the 400th anniversary of the founding of Boston is going to happen in 2030. So now in 4.5 years, really 5 years. And so I'm with a colleague, I'm working on a book that would come out perhaps sometime around the celebrations of the 400th anniversary of Boston. There are two books that I've written that I would just like to mention, because in case any of your readers may want to kind of sort of look them up. One is called Mapping Boston, which is a history of the city of Boston through its maps, because Boston has grown through Boston was settled on an island almost. And so the only way it could grow was to make land, and by filling portions of the harbor and wetlands and tidal flats and so forth. So it's a very interesting story about how a city could grow. And so Mapping Boston tells that story. And then back to the class that you asked me about some time ago, a book came out a couple of years ago called City on a Hill, Urban Idealism in America from the Puritans to the present, which again is this sort of history about why American cities and suburbs and metropolitan areas have developed in the way that they have, trying to somehow improve upon the history of sort of, pre-industrial kinds of cities and medieval cities and so forth, right? Why Americans have used various aspirational techniques, not always successful, to kind of reconceive of how cities should look and be organized. So those are a couple of things with which we can end this session. So I thank you for the opportunity to speak with you, and good luck with your podcast. And I'd love to see one of them. And so you may have sent me a link. I'd love to kind of check out a couple of your podcasts.
Okay, yeah. I'll resend you the links, and I want to thank you again. This has definitely been an honor. You shared a lot of great information. It's very inspiring, interesting, and empowering. And I definitely look forward to the work that you got, coming in the future as well. So keep doing what you do.
Keep doing what you do as well. Thank you very much.
All right, take care. Bye.